This is Sean Connery. You are listening to The Experts with Jonathan Gilliam. The truth has arrived. You have the manners of a goat and you smell like a dung heap. This is Jonathan Gilliam back in on The Experts. And yes, we are dropping the hammer down. And today on the show, we are going to have my good buddy Scott Eulinger, who is a former CIA station chief. He was a operations officer of the CIA. He was a naval officer before that, graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy. He's going to tell you all about that. And I recorded this interview about 2 weeks ago, but it's pretty timeless because Scott is, he's just amazing. And the experience that this guy has, which we'll go over, it's pretty incredible. The guy reads like 3 books all the time. He's reading like 3 books at one time. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I do not claim to be as smart as Scott Eulinger, but I think it's very interesting because at the end of this, what I want you to ask yourself, after you listen to this, ask yourself, is this a guy that would be great in Congress? I think I know what your answer will be. It'll be yes. But unfortunately, the reality is Scott ran for Congress in Pennsylvania's, I think, 9th district. He didn't even get freaking backed by the Republican Party. They just backed some guy who's, a lackey for the Republican Party who lost. And this is the problem that we have around the country is that people like Scott Eulinger with years and years of education and experience, real world operating, knowing what's happening around the world and what's happening in this country. And he can't get elected, not because people won't vote for him, because the Republican Party establishment is so corrupt that they won't give or fund or give any assistance to people that they don't want. It's not what you want. It's not what's best for this country. It's what they want. That's what they concentrate on. So when we get to the end of this, I want you to ask yourself that. And then ask, why aren't people like Scott being pulled to the front, not pushed to the front, pulled to the front to run against the leftists in this country? It's very troubling for me when I get to know people like Scott Eulinger. It's very troubling. And I see the reality of what's happened and how he has not been utilized properly. His experience when he stepped forward and said, I will serve again. Now, there are some people in Congress like Louis Gohmert. I really do like Louis Gohmert a lot. I think he has a tremendous love for this country, and he is talented, and he has done so much stuff. Look at his resume. I like Nunez, although I think Nunez and I like Jim Jordan. I'd like to see them do more. I know they've done quite a bit. I think Nunez has done a lot. He put himself on the line, but what's with this Congress? Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to answer my own question. The Republicans in Congress are made up of some of these great guys and many of the Republican establishment. So the people who are up there that are really worth something don't get anything done because they don't band together. Everybody comes to me and saying, oh, Trey Gowdy would be a great attorney general. Trey Gowdy is establishment as they come. And I think when you look at the reality of what Trey Gowdy was, Trey Gowdy is the same thing as people who sit around and talk really loud and make themselves self-promote themselves, and there's no substance there. There's no substance to anything Trey Gowdy did. That's why he was there and gone. But once again, in order for you to see these things, you actually have to do some research, which I hope that you're doing, because you're going to be profoundly upset as well. And hopefully that'll cause a reaction where everybody will start to do what I've been preaching over and over again, which is getting up away from social media, not behind your computer, and doing what they did in Virginia. Stand for the Second Amendment. Stand for the First Amendment. Stand against the DOJ. I've said this before. Imagine if 50,000 people surrounded the DOJ. Nobody's going to work there. There's nothing that this country, there's nothing that the government could do to stop 50,000 people who surrounded the DOJ for the right reason. They're not going to do anything, but they're not going to do anything to stop you. But just like what happened in Virginia, that assault weapons ban, stupidest name in the world, did not go through because of the people in Virginia. It wasn't because the left wasn't trying to do it or gave up. It's because the people stood up. And that's what you need to do. Forget about these cults. Forget about these groups of people that say there's a plan, that AG Barr is great. I know there was a story came out and I tweeted out saying it was released by Fox News, which is interesting, saying that AG Barr was contemplating quitting because he couldn't put up with Trump's tweets and that Trump was keeping him from doing his job. They then came back and had two stories saying that it wasn't true. And the DOJ gave pushback. But I got to tell you, it sounded a lot like Rosenstein when he said that he would wear a wire against Trump. And they were talking about the 25th Amendment and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they're saying, oh, that never happened. Then they said, yeah, it happened, but it was in passing. It was a joke. I have a feeling that that's probably what happened with Barr, is that he said this out of frustration. Frustration not because he can't do his job. Frustration because it makes him look like a chump, which I believe he is. He doesn't do anything. Well, do you tell me who Barr has put in jail that is a part of this conspiracy to overthrow the president? He hasn't put anybody in there. Somebody wrote, I put on there on Twitter today what conspiracy is, and somebody, this is how stupid people are on Twitter. They come on, they say that they've shown, in order to charge someone or a group of people with conspiracy, they have to show intent. I mean, they don't just show intent. They say it in their text. They manufacture evidence to get a FISA to go and spy on the president, right? Manufacture evidence, leak fake information to the media who's conspiring with them. So they create fake evidence, leak the information of that fake evidence to the media, quote unquote, leak it. They just give it to them. The media then goes and reports it. They then use those reports to help them get the FISA, to go listen to the president and people in his cabinet. And then, and I know this happened because it's just I've ran investigations. I've done Title IIIs, which is the same thing as a FISA. It's not under the secret court. There's never a time, and all cops could back me up on this, there's never a time when you have a wire that we need to know that this guy meets with Russians. Boom, they meet with Russians. We need to know that person has been talking to this Russian. Bling, it all of a sudden happens. It doesn't work like that. If somebody's guilty and you put a wiretap in there, you're going to hear when they are specifically talking about that crime. That never happened in any of the wiretaps that they had against Trump. What you heard were meetings that were purposely set up, what I believe are sources to the Democrat Party, and then they recorded those meetings. They knew the questions that were going to be asked because they were asked by Russian ambassadors and other people that have connections with the Democrat Party. That's what happened. Or they have connections with the CIA. Yeah, I said it. And that's how all of this stuff came about. And if that doesn't show intent, then we can never in a court of law prove intent on anyone else. It doesn't matter if they said, yes, I want to murder that person. You can't prove intent. If the Attorney General of the United States and all their powerful lawyers can't sit back and take that and go forward and prove intent. I mean, it must just not be possible to prove intent. Stupid what people write on Twitter. And it's stupid what people, how they throw this faith in the Barr. Oh, he's got this plan. The plan's going to come out. Trust Barr. He's a great guy. Take a look at Barr's history. Take a look at who he has, his relationships are with. He's as swampy as you can get. And I don't care if I meet him tomorrow or if he turns around and puts somebody in jail. He's still swampy. And I don't trust any of them. Any of them. The president, I hear, is potentially going to put Rick Grinnell as the acting director of national intelligence. Rick Grinnell should be nowhere around the government. I've dealt with him personally. He's a nasty, vicious individual who doesn't really care about veterans, and he's very spiteful, very unprofessional. And I don't know how people like him continue to rise in these areas, except for the fact that he got an in and he's a self-promoter. But you can, again, this is a guy you can measure his relationships. You can measure the work that he does. It doesn't add up to anything. Why would this president, who I respect and I support, why would he continue to put people like this in positions of authority, especially in the national security branch? I mean, I don't get it. But listen, those of you that want to believe that there's a plan, you go ahead, because you, in one hand, you criticize all these people in Washington, D.C. for being part of this swamp. And then on the other hand, you think because they work in and around the president that they're not swampy. How many people has this president had to fire? A lot of them because of Reince Priebus, who was a huge swamp creature, brought these people in. And yet you don't understand. You don't see who these people are. You think there's a plan and they're a part of it. Well, they're not. And Rick Grinnell is another mistake waiting to happen. Can guarantee it. I mean, he may sit there and do nothing, but I don't trust these people. I've seen them up close. So I want you to stew on that. And I want you to listen now as I play the interview with Scott Eulinger. And I want you to think about this guy. I want you to think about this experience. Listen how intelligent this guy is and the incredible stories he has. Then compare that, and also where he's been. He hasn't been in Washington, D.C. He's not a swamp creature. Compare that to these people who have existed in Washington, D.C. for 30, 40 years. Going back, some of them all the way to the Reagan era and even before. And they're still in D.C., just jumping in on all these positions, as though there's nobody else in this country that can do these jobs. There's literally millions of people that could do these jobs. It's not rocket science. They have you snowed. These elitists in Washington, D.C., these Ivy School graduates, they have you believing that they know more than they do, that they're in a better position to do those jobs, that they're up here and you are down here, and you should let them do the job. If that was the case, we wouldn't have a two-tiered justice system. We would have an equal playing field for all peoples. That's not the way it is. Go get 50 of your friends and conspire to overthrow the president. Watch what happens to you. There's not going to be any report written about you. They're not going to say, well, you didn't have you just leaked some information, so we're going to let you go. No, that ain't going to happen. You all are going to be in jail, and you're going to be held there while they investigate this thing and it unfolds, and then you're going to get tried, and you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life. That's what would happen. If it was 50 years ago, you'd be hung. So let's go ahead. I'm going to start playing the interview with Scott Eulinger, and enjoy it. The truth has arrived. All right. As promised, my good buddy Scott Eulinger. Scott has a resume. What is it now, Scott? Is it CV, resume, pedigree? What do we call it these days?
I think I call it a CV just because I'm a little bit of a Euro weenie. Spent a little bit too much time in Europe, maybe, so I tend to use that expression.
Well, when did that become a thing, by the way? CV.
I don't know, maybe I'd say 15, 20 years ago. I mean, it's a big European term. And just, like in the CIA, I was overseas from basically like the year 1999 on. So I guess I've been infected that way by a little bit of Euro trash thinking or something.
So for those people that, may have heard Scott and I, we've been on, we've been on everything together. We've been on Newsmax. Have we been on Fox before? I know when I hosted Sean Hannity's radio show, I've had you on there with me and David Webb and Andrew Wilkow. And Scott's a former naval officer, and he was also a CIA operations officer, and he was a chief of station in a country just outside of Russia, basically. What was that country?
It was Moldova.
Moldova.
So it's it's part of the Soviet Union, but it was Romanian speaking. Right, exactly. And that's where actually I after I finished that tour, I retired, and I actually have a Moldovan wife who's now a naturalized U.S. citizen, and I have a Moldovan daughter who's actually just starting freshman year at university.
So let's I love the way you say it, at university.
Again, that's the Euro thing on my I'm not a coffee drinker. I drink a lot of tea. It's too much time in the Eastern Europe, I guess.
So before we just start off in your career and your life, and then get to some current events today, I want to ask you what you just stated there. I know several. I mean, of course, in the Navy, it's the same thing. Guys in certain SEAL teams or certain areas where they work and they're stationed there for a while. There's tons of German wives and Filipino wives in the United States that the guys met them when they were overseas. Is the CIA the same way, where you're stationed somewhere and then you end up marrying somebody from that area?
That's actually a very good question, and it's never come up. It's somewhat true, John, but actually the stereotype is actually slightly different. The stereotype is more the CIA guy gets divorced from his American wife after too much time overseas and takes up with a foreign wife. That's more common. So you'll see CIA guys who are 50 and have a 3-year-old and a 23-year-old, that kind of thing.
Wow.
I was the odd one. I didn't get married until I was later in life. I waited until I was 46 before I pulled the trigger, and that was the first time I've ever been married.
Okay, so let's start off with an area where most people don't. When they watch us on TV or hear us on the radio, they never really get into our backgrounds, and that's one of the things, as I was explaining earlier, that this show isn't just about current events, which you're going to get with, if you listen to a lot of the other people that have podcasts, you're not going to get the inside scoop because a lot of them don't have guests. And the guests that I do have, there's a reason why the show is called The Experts, because I either go out and get the information, having been operational, I know the right people to ask, the right questions to ask so that I get this information. Right. But also to get the background of guys like yourself. I mean, first of all, where are you from, and how did you end up with this career track? Is it something that you made a plan when you were younger? I did that, and so I had to step by step the things that I was wanting to do, or did this blossom?
I think it's a combination of both, John. My mom and dad are just native-born Americans. My dad was a police officer on Long Island in Suffolk County, and my mom worked in the courts. So I have a very, very traditional middle-class background. Maybe one thing that was slightly different was that my parents, despite the fact they just went to basically a little bit of junior college, not really a college degree, but they were always kind of interested in just what was happening in the world, what was going on, and my dad had been in the army or drafting in Germany, so we were maybe my family was just kind of comfortable a little bit with foreign cultures, even though we didn't have any immigrants in our family or anything like that, but we just kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit open-minded about that stuff or interested in that stuff. And I was always interested in traveling, and getting to see and doing interesting things. I was like a lot of people like you, like almost everybody I run into, a lot of history buffs, people who read about other people doing great things, and maybe that inspires them to try to do some of the same thing.
Right.
So so I was, raised in like, this kind of environment. Actually, when we were talking offline before about like different events that maybe helped shape you. And one news event that really affected me. And as I look back, I can see it really affected me because we're still dealing with it, is Iran. I remember the 1979 Iran Revolution. I was 15 years old in 79. And it was a big deal to the American public and maybe even to my family in particular. I specifically have a memory of when my dad and I found out about the Desert One fiasco, which is when we tried to rescue our hostages.
Right.
And it was a collision in the desert with helicopters and people died. And I specifically remember how we felt, and my dad and I talking about that, how horrible it was under the presidency of, Jimmy Carter, who was a disaster of a president. And then when I later on I went to the Merchant Marine Academy. I wanted to go to a service academy. I wanted to go to West Point, Annapolis, or Kings Point, where I wound up going, and never regretted that choice. And I went to the Merchant Marine Academy, and I was going into the military, so to speak, at a time when it was the time of Reagan's 600-ship Navy. So the United States, similar to under Trump now, was becoming a little bit more assertive, was tired of being pushed around. And I was, a 19-year-old midshipman or 20-year-old midshipman who was, psyched about going into the Navy when I graduated. And, that's what I did. And so in the Navy, I was on the front line, with Russian frigates right, like half a mile away up in the Baltic Sea in the waning days of the Cold War in like 88 and 89, like that, you see?
Right. So what was it about those events? Did those events push you to basically want to be in government service? Or was this something you got from your, being around your father as a cop and stuff?
I think, no, it did, because see, when I was also another thing, whatever, the Lord gave me the ability. I'm pretty good with languages. So like I studied Spanish in high school, and believe it or not, I was a Spanish language translator on my ship in the Navy because we went to South America. Ironically, the South Americans had an easier time understanding me than like some Puerto Rican officers because I spoke clean Spanish, not Spanglish. Mm-hmm. So I was always fascinated by like other cultures and all. And so when I left active duty, I sailed commercially and I continued to travel abroad. But later on, I decided to apply to the CIA because I said, I don't want to just visit countries now. I want to live in another country.
But people don't just, especially if you're working commercially, and I want you to explain that, but when you say you're working commercially, but people don't just show up or just one day say, I want to go in the CIA. There must have been something brewing in there. Did you meet somebody? What was it that turned you towards the CIA? A lot of people think about that, but you actually did that. What was it that kind of got you into that direction?
Right, that's a good thing. Well, I used to watch a lot of Bond movies as a kid, and Bond always had the nice-looking foreign women, and that's actually a good question. So my school, the Merchant Marine Academy, teaches you how to be a civilian mariner, like a navigator on an oil tanker or a container ship. So when I got out of the Navy, I went into the trade I had been taught at the academy, and so I was on roll-on, roll-off ships, which you drive tanks on. And actually, I skipped a part. I was in the Gulf War in 1991. Ironically, it was as a civilian and not in the military, because I was on a merchant ship delivering tanks, M1 tanks, to the Army.
So you were a ship driver.
That's right, exactly. I was a navigator. I was a second mate. As a first mate would be the equivalent of like an XO, and then the master is the captain. So I did that for about 5 years, and unlike some people, like you hear a lot about CIA, like for instance, someone's going to grad school or something like that, and somebody like who's maybe is working for the agency at the grad school taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, I think you've got what it takes, and things like that. But with me, it was actually quite different. It was literally applying for a regular job. Like I had to fill out all the forms, and I just applied like you apply for the post office or something.
Wow.
Now I had, my resume was unusual because I was Navy. I had Spanish. I was learning Russian on my own. pre-internet, that was not easy, but I was like starting, and my merchant, but I think my merchant marine background is also very odd for the CIA, because most of these guys, they don't all go to Ivy League schools, but they usually, a lot of them have master's degrees. They went to Georgetown or something, and here I am. I'm an academy grad who was an officer in the Navy, then an officer in the merchant marine. But it was like a very diverse, unusual background. And so hopefully, I guess somebody perceptive says, let's interview this guy.
Well,
and so during the interview, I specifically remember one question they asked me. Like, there was a phone interview, and then later on there was a personal interview, which was actually in Times Square in New York City, because I lived on Long Island, and they have a road show and they interview people. But like, the one question they asked me, they want to understand, like, how much are you following foreign affairs? So figure this is 1995 or so, and they basically said, name the 4 former Soviet states that have nuclear weapons. Because, okay, they just want to see, does this guy follow the news or not? It'll be Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Well, I knew that, because I just read a lot of news, and I've always, I'm a big reader. I'm always I've been reading 3 books at a time every day for my entire life. So they were like, wow, okay, and so then you have a lot of psyche evals and an interview with an operations officer, which was an interesting interview, because he was an African-American officer who had actually served a lot of time in the Philippines. So probably in like the Vietnam era or the 70s. He's a very interesting guy, and I got to know him a little bit after I was in the agency.
So I'm not going to go into great detail about this and interrupt you, but I happen to know exactly how this process goes. So that's as far as I'm going to leave it.
Right, it's similar. So it's pretty.
No. I mean, I know exactly how your process goes. Then polygraph. Well, I'll just say this: I applied to the agency and the FBI, and I went to the FBI. And the process is for those that don't know, the process that you're describing is a long process.
Don't get us started on the polygraph, because I'm not a big proponent of the polygraph.
I'm not either, but it is like having your soul scrubbed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, exactly. So eventually I started work, and so the interesting thing, though, when I went in the agency, I'm kind of proud of, is that, again, historical times. This literally, if you looked on it would be a classified chart that showed how many operations officers were allowed in the CIA on a yearly basis since the OSS started in like 1943. Like, the year I went in was, in the history of the CIA and the OSS, was the year that they let in the least people in the operational ranks.
Wow.
Because I'm literally talking about 30 people in a population of 300 million were let in. And I was one of the 30.
Wow.
30 people. Now, why was that? That historically, the Cold War is over. History is over. Everything is going to be just, rainbows and unicorns. And there were people writing about, we don't even need a CIA anymore, because it's the peace dividend and everything's hunky-dory now, I've lived through these things too. And you have too, reductions in force in the Navy or even the FBI. So when I went in, there were hardly any of us. And there was, it was a relatively diverse group, quite, a fair amount of former military, enlisted and officer, by the way, totally mixed, because enlisted ranks in the military are often much better, or almost always much better linguists than like officers, forget it. And so some people were picked because like they spoke Chinese, for example, things like that in the Air Force, matters like that. So that's how I wound up in the agency in basically like 1996.
Wow.
You see?
Yeah. Hey,
but it's the nice thing about like the process. See, this is the problem with going into the FBI or the CIA. The process is onerous and very time consuming. And the problem is that when people, like, for instance, go to grad school or finish, like, they need a job to pay the bills. And the FBI and CIA take so damn long to process people that a lot of people say, well, that's very nice, but you guys are 8 months late, and I had to take another job. See, fortunately for me, I was sailing commercially, so I worked like 4 months on at sea, 2 months off. So like, I could kind of continue my regular career as I applied for this job. And then I was a union member, actually. So like a maritime union member. So I could just, okay, I'm stopping going to sea. And that's exactly what happened. I just quit the sea and went into the CIA.
Yeah, that is a good place to be, because most people that are applying for these jobs, you're exactly right. Like with the FBI, I applied after I got out of the SEAL teams, and they just set my application to the side. I don't know what they were doing with it. And then a year and a half later, I went back, and the lady pulled it up and was like, actually, it was longer than that. It was 3 years later, I think, 3.5 years later. Yeah. I went back, and they're like, she was like, and you never got called? I was like, no. And she pulled my resume. She's like, I don't know why you've never gotten called. She goes, I think they meet, there was different criteria where you can qualified, less than qualified, or something. I can't remember how it is, but
right.
But she's like, gosh, 6 months later, I was in the Bureau.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's right. That's again, anyone in the government is not surprised by that story. It sounds like exactly. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I initially applied to the agency. Maybe it was in '94, and they actually told me no. But like anything, it's just timing. The next year they needed people. I reapplied, and then they took me. So, it just depends on the luck of the draw. Like maybe they had too many applications that year, so you just put yours on the side and forgot about it. And then the next year, oh wow, we need, it's typical government, hurry up and wait kind of stuff. So then
hold on one second.
And then my career continued afterwards, and I stayed in the Naval Reserve. It was nice just because of my odd placement in the Naval Reserve. I was able to keep up a Naval Reserve career in parallel, like in other words, 2 weeks a year. So I was able to retire from both the CIA and the Naval Reserve, which is just a nice thing that not a lot of people pull off.
Well, with that being said, two questions come to mind. One, you were talking about NATO. So what is your take on NATO? Because I have my take on it, but also what's your take on these incidents that have been happening over and over where our ships are just freaking crushing other ships?
Actually, that's actually a very good question. I've actually written an article on that in Newsmax around the time it happened. But by the way, the other thing I didn't throw out there, because now you're going to start thinking I'm making stuff up. But I was involved in a collision at sea in October 1988. I remember the exact date and time. We're in the North Sea, and my destroyer cut across the bow of a German oiler.
I remember that.
It ripped a hole in our starboard quarter right next to the stern, the rear end of the ship, and flooded the steering compartment, which is how the rudders are moved, with 80 tons of seawater. And I was the damage control officer back there. In other words, I was the guy who was in charge of trying to fix or stop the damage from spreading.
I'd rather be that guy than the guy that was driving the ship, though. At that point,
that's a very good point. I was in the rack when that happened, and so obviously, you don't want to be the officer of the deck driving that ship, or the captain for that matter.
What ship was that?
Like that happens. That was the USS Euhlinger, which was repaired. It was repaired in Scotland when I was on board and in dry dock, because that was the closest. We were in North Sea. Scotland was like the closest we could go, and then later on, the ship was actually sunk as a target. And including SEAL teams went on board and planted explosives on it, and it was sunk. So folks can look that up. DD-997, the USS Euhlinger.
That's what we do.
But right, exactly. So they were practicing, and then they used all kinds of weapons, including a SEAL team dropped on it to blow the ship up and make an artificial reef out of it or something. Wow. But the collisions at sea thing is something that is very close to my heart, and it's of great concern to me. Now, why would that be? Okay, particularly because for people who weren't in the Navy, or even you, John, you don't know because you weren't in the surface Navy, is I went to the Merchant Marine Academy, okay? Mm-hmm. To get a Merchant Marine officer's license is a very exhausting task. I have to take a test by the Coast Guard. I have to know international rules of the road to the level of 90% to pass it. If you have an 88, you fail it. So to get a license in the Merchant Marine, and which is a third mate's license, and then you sail for like a year, you take another test to get second mate. And I did that 3 times. I was up to the level of first mate. You have to have an incredible knowledge of the maritime world, of cargo handling gear, of navigation is a 90% area. You have to get a 90 to pass it. And as a result, merchant marine types like myself in the Navy have a reputation for the guys who really know their seamanship, who know how to drive a ship, who know how to safely navigate a ship, and all of these things. The problem is that, and I saw this in 1990. So you can imagine, and it's gotten only worse since then. Mm-hmm. The problem is the over reliance on electronic systems such as GPS, which was literally coming online in 91 when I was in the Gulf War. The thing was like the size of one of those old walkie-talkies. It was enormous, but GPS was a new technology in 1991, and we were using it. But what's happened is, and you see this in a lot of aspects of the military, hopefully not special forces as much, but like in technical positions in the Air Force and the Navy, is that you start like, oh, well, I don't need to know this because the computer can always tell me how to do it. That type of attitude. Mm-hmm. And people become overly reliant on automated systems, so that like the collisions that the U.S. Navy had about 2 years ago now were disasters, and frankly would never ever happen with somebody of my generation, with my background on the bridge. Because, and it's, by the way, it's not just the U.S. Navy, it's other navies as well. The Norwegian Navy, John, has only literally, they have like 4 destroyers at the most, okay? They had $1 billion destroyer, and it was sunk in a fjord because of a mistake in navigation. So like literally 1/4 of their Navy is gone because of a mistake. That happened about 2 years ago. So like, and it was the same type of ridiculous error that for somebody of my generation is almost unimaginable.
Right.
It's like no one, like everyone's got their head in a radar or in a system, but like no one's actually looking out the windows. You know, like when you change lanes on the highway, you know, you check your blind spot.
But I think it is probably puzzling to people when they hear about like when the submarine, a U.S. submarine, shoots up out of the water, which they were doing an exercise where they do the ballast and they release those ballasts and it shoots the sub up, and it shot up right underneath a Japanese fishing vessel and sunk it.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
Well, there's 2 things bad about that. One is the fact that they have this thing they do with real rich people, and they take them around. And I've never understood how this is the case. So I dealt with this in the Bureau, in the FBI. I dealt with this when I was in the SEAL teams, where they have this group of people that are very, very wealthy in the country. They give them secret clearances, and then they take them on tours of all these different facilities. They get to see what the SEALs are capable of. They get to see what submarines do.
Wow, I never even realized that program existed. I thought
that's who was at.
It would be like political. It would be just politicos.
That's who was at the steering wheel of that submarine.
Wow. Yeah. So look, going to sea is a hazardous profession. It's inherently dangerous. A lot of what is done is inherently dangerous, but you don't need to compound that by being stupid. And too many times that's exactly what happens.
It's such a big ocean. You would I mean, I guess maybe that's what it is that it's a big ocean, but really the freeway of ships and boats is really not that big. They pretty much travel in the same spot.
Bingo. That's exactly the point. That's right. Oh, the ocean's so big. Yeah, but except for one thing. If you're going to go from New York, the port of New York to Rotterdam, there's only one way to go. You're not going to go via the South Atlantic. There is one highway. And so all of the ships are on these major arteries that trade links that join the continents. No one is hanging out in the South Atlantic.
I know a guy who was on an Exxon Euler, and he was on the same ship when he was in the Navy. It took 500 people to run that, and when he was on the Exxon ship, they did it with 25 people.
Right, it was right. See, like there's right exactly. See, like the Navy, they have different manning philosophies. But another thing, like, so to give you a perfect example, on when I was in the Navy, when we were coming into, like, let's say Rio de Janeiro or something, mm-hmm. there could be like 15 people on the bridge: the captain, the officer of the deck, the conning officer, and a phone talker, and all these other lookouts and all this other stuff. A merchant ship is for a for-profit operation. So, I've never been on a merchant ship that had more than like 25 people. So when I was standing, so think about it. So I'm at this time, I'm about 20, let's say 25 years old when I'm out of the Navy, maybe 26. I'm 26. I am driving a ship that is maybe 8 times bigger in tonnage than my destroyer. And I'm alone on the bridge with a seaman on the wheel. It's me and him, and that is it. And I'm going through, and I'm departing the, I'm in like the Gulf of Aden, or I'm dead in the south of the Suez Canal, and it's a goat rope out there, and I'm alone. Now, if I have a problem, I can call the captain. But what I'm saying is, it's not like 15 people are on the bridge. There's barely even 15 people on the whole damn ship.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think about NATO, though? That's a question that we skipped over. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think people are going to be, if I'm reading people as I'm listening to this, it's fascinating, but I think there's going to be a portion of people are going to be like, these guys could talk about boats and ships all night. What do you think about NATO?
Okay, that's a good question. This is good. Now, so I have the point of view. Remember, I worked with NATO for years. Okay, now those years were a long time ago. Now we're talking about 1987, 1988, 89. Now I was very impressed with what I saw of NATO in those days. Mm-hmm. But the point and the thing that almost everyone, okay, so basically I'm kind of I'm very not sarcastic. I'm very careful when it comes to NATO nowadays. But most of the people who sound the arguments who are pro-NATO, they act as if NATO is the way it was in 1989. I'm sorry, it is not. It is a withered, skeleton-like shadow of its former self, okay, in terms of the capability of NATO forces, okay? I mean, literally, I'm a big history buff and all that stuff. But, in the 80s, in the 60s, in the 70s, like let's say the German Air Force had hundreds of aircraft. And okay, they weren't the technology was at a lower level, but so was the enemy's. They had hundreds of aircraft. Mm-hmm. They had dozens of ships. Well, now it's like reported that the German Luftwaffe has literally like 12 fighters that maybe can work. 12, not hundreds.
The Germans.
12.
The Germans.
The modern Bundeswehr, exactly. The modern Luftwaffe has literally like 8 Eurofighter Typhoons that they think will work. And they got like 20 hangar queens that need various parts. And they're pulling parts off of one to make the other one work.
So shouldn't it be the case that we know if something happens that we're going to be the one fighting the fight? We're going to come to Germany's aid. Let's say if Russia, flipped out and they started taking over, or if they had a Islamic uprising in Germany or whatever, which could be with all the refugees in the
frankly, even though my last name is Eulinger, I'm inclined to just let the Germans just stew in their own juices into hell with them, because I'm sick and tired of the Germans.
Well, they're
just jerks.
That's the question I have, is all these countries, I don't think people realize when it comes to NATO, all these different countries, they don't even, not only are they not capable, but they don't even spend the money on building up their military because they know we're going to come and fight it for them.
That's right, and there's another part to that too, right? Yeah, because believe me, I know a lot about this stuff. Okay, like for example, so the Royal Navy, right, which was the world's premier navy in the last century, the Royal Navy right now has like literally like 20 destroyers. 20. You can look it up. It's unbelievable how far the Royal Navy has fallen in just the past 30 years. So they have 2 aircraft carriers, which, by the way, they barely can afford the airplanes to put on the carriers. But the problem is that they have like literally 20 destroyers. For the first time in like 300 years, the French Navy is larger than the Royal Navy.
So literally, if China and Russia,
it would be forget it. As far as navies go, the Russians actually have a fairly impressive navy. I'm actually impressed by what they've come back from like, I pulled into a Russian port in the Navy on a frigate in '93, and I literally, it's like going to a white trash neighbor's house. I literally remember seeing ships that were sunk at the pier. You literally saw only their radar antennas sticking up out of the water.
Classy.
Ships that were sunk at the pier. I wish I'd gotten pictures of that stuff. But what I'm saying is they have gone through a real resurgence, and they have a fairly, I think they have a lot to be proud of. They have a respectable Navy, and I think actually the Russian Navy is larger than the British Navy and the French Navy. I don't know if larger than the two of them combined, but But see, this is the thing. What's happened in the last 30 years? PC culture and liberalization means that these countries' economies, their spending is all on social spending, on making sure that the mass migrants from North Africa have a nice place to stay and 300 euros in their pocket every month. They don't have time to build tanks and destroyers and aircraft. They're too busy repairing the bomb damage that like rival North African gangs have wrought overnight. They don't have time to spend money on their defense.
That's just crazy. This is great. This is crazy. Yeah, so this is crazy to me. And I think the majority of people that are listening to this, whether they realize it or not, would be shocked. I mean, the thing you said about the 12 aircraft in Germany or 20 ships in the British Navy, I mean, I don't think people realize how, like when we go to Vegas, right? And I'll be in Vegas for SHOT Show. And you look at something that's marble, you might be able to take a bat and punch it through that because it's not real marble, because Vegas is very fake. They got a lot of, fake pyramids and fake Empire State Building, and it's fake. And that's what NATO is like. It's not really a group of allies that are going to take care of each other. It's a group of different countries that can't take care of themselves against. If China and Russia decided they wanted to take over Europe, it probably wouldn't be that difficult right now.
Right. I mean, it would. These forces
and we'd end up fighting.
These forces are hollow. They're hollow. They're far now. The ships that, let's say, the Danes and the Dutch have, or the Italians, they're good ships, but they just don't have nearly enough of them. They have, 30% what they had in 1988, and it's not enough.
And it's not changed. The world is just as dangerous as it was then.
That's right. That's right. And so, these countries, like I said, and their air forces are of particular note, because air forces are like for land battles and sea battles. But the air forces have fallen so far. I don't care what air force, whether it's the Royal Air Force, the French Air Force. The numbers we're talking about are shocking. The numbers are shocking. People can look all this stuff up on Wikipedia or whatever, but these countries are not investing in their defense, because they just are kind of hoping to blunder through the next crisis. They don't want to deal with it.
That's exactly.
I remember in Libya. I think it was in Libya when Hillary was taking out Gaddafi. What a great decision that was. I think within the Royal Air Force and the French Air Force were there with us, and I think it was something like in 3 days they had basically used all of their bombs, period.
Well,
except nuclear.
Same thing.
And they had to get extra bombs from the United States. So like an Air Force that runs out of its bombs in 3 days. What war lasts 3 days?
Right. Well, it's the same thing when we look at any of these issues. Terrorism, for instance. The liberal policies, and I talked about this with Drago, about socialism and communism in those countries and how the liberal mindset's kind of infested with this, but they don't look at like they think they can just pass things along, and okay, if terrorist incident happens, it's only going to kill 5 or 10 people, or even the case of 9/11, it killed thousands, but it didn't really affect the forward momentum of the country. And I literally think that these people think that way, and they think, because I dealt with this in the FBI, I dealt with it in the Navy and the SEAL teams, believe it or not. I dealt with it when I worked security, when I was a cop, everything. Everybody thinks, just like they did with North Korea. When they first went in there, I don't know why we got out of North Korea. We should have ended up crushing that family. But now, 50, 60 years later, we're still dealing with the legacy of not fixing the problem, and administrations have just passed the problem on to the next one. That's
absolutely true, John. And I was actually thinking about this kind of thing just a couple of days ago, because with Soleimani's death, with Iran and all this stuff, because politicians by their nature, they want to avoid responsibility. So in a kind of a cynical calculus, LBJ would rather just, wage a low-level war in Vietnam and have it go on for 8 years with just constant attrition of U.S. people, rather than risk an all-out bombing campaign that may or may not kill a larger amount of people. If I decide, okay, I'm just going to start bombing every major city in North Vietnam, or the only major city in North Vietnam, and I may lose like 40 aircraft at once.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's kind of like the all or nothing. I'd rather have an extended war like in Iraq that just kills a couple of troops a day, because I can deal with that politically,
right,
rather than take the risk of losing either 10 or 1,000 if I miscalculate. But see, politicians want to avoid making those kinds of decisions,
right,
because they don't want to pay the price when it turns out the op went south and we lost 1,000 guys. They would rather that we lose 3,000 guys over the next 4 years, because they're not going to be called on the carpet for that.
And I've talked about this before with in 47 that we went from the Department of War to the Department of Defense, right? And Secretary of Defense was created. And we haven't won a war since then. And it's the exact reasons why you're saying. And I keep saying about Iran especially, that if this president finally just said, okay, enough is enough, it's time to destroy the regime. I know he's probably got these leftist CIA people. I'm not saying you're leftist, but I've had that conversation before about the agency, how and the FBI, and how these people are so leftist and that are advising the president. And they're probably saying, no, support the protesters. So, we'll overthrow the regime that way. I'm not interested personally. And I think we can look at history and see that overthrowing a regime doesn't work. You have to eliminate them, because they will come back like a virus eventually. And that's the problem with our enemies throughout history that has been able to resurface, is because we didn't crush that enemy. And that's something that is a modern day thinking with these modern day rules of engagement.
Incrementalism, all this stuff. That's right. But okay. And the justification for listeners, I think, look, those people, and sometimes you and I might disagree on certain situations, or I might disagree with more people, based on each, because I'm not saying I have one set of rules for everything, like maybe sometimes I'm willing to go a little incrementalist more than some other guy, or the opposite. Mm-hmm. But the point is that the justification for being more careful is that, well, we're in the nuclear age now, and so a miscalculation could mean the end of the planet, supposedly. But see, that is I think, well, it's a bogus argument in the sense that in the last, let's say, well, since the Iranian Revolution, like our policy with Iran has been screwed up pretty much from the get-go. And there was actually a very good article written in the Jerusalem Post, I think it was, and by a famous Jewish writer, female, and it was excellent. And she's saying, how this death of Soleimani is a very, very big deal, because it literally is undoing like 30 years of failed U.S. policy. And this is failed U.S. policy that all of the admirals and the four-star generals, they've been getting it wrong too, because they're the ones maybe who are urging caution and being careful. It's not just maybe an incompetent Jimmy Carter. It's his advisors around him are giving him bad advice. Oh, we can't do that. What about the Russians? We can't do a hostage rescue in 1980 because of this and that. And it's all garbage.
And it's the same. It's the same thing.
It's all been BS. It's all been wrong. And Trump has shown how it is wrong.
And it's the same. It's the same careerism and the same. Let's pass it along as you would see with these with these other countries like London and Germany with their militaries. This is where, and I want to kind of get into this a little bit. This is where I believe what we call the deep state, and people think the deep state is local. It's in this country. I actually believe that the deep state it transcends borders, and that there is, I don't want to say it like the conspiracy theorist type thing, but I believe there are
definitely confluent.
It's like a cabal.
Let's say extend across nationalities.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm not a total foil head with that stuff, but it is a fact that there is some of that. There's no question.
But the behaviors,
like the Davos crowd in Davos, Switzerland, kind of thing.
Yeah, and the behaviors of this crowd, right? Whether it's just that society has kind of evolved like this because of the lack of nationalism and borders and things like that. That societies have evolved where careerism and pass it offism, I don't know what that word would be, but where those things have evolved. And that's the way.
Right.
And that's the way people. That's the way that they do things now. You know, in the military,
Right.
It's no different than the CIA or any, and it transcends countries. If you get to a certain level in rank, you don't get promoted through achievement. You get promoted because people reach down and pull you up. And
that's right.
And that's a thing that has, I think, that has allowed. I don't know if that's always been in history. It seems to have gotten worse. It seems to have gotten worse.
I think it has gotten worse, but it is like an inherent human quality. It's one of our shortcomings as human beings. And believe me, it's frustrating because you and I have both been on the receiving end of this kind of thing.
Right.
But it has gotten worse lately. But it really is true because, one aspect I think I would say about myself, and I'll compare myself and Trump in one sentence, is that Trump is one thing he has a relatively high tolerance for risk. I am a little bit of the same. I have a relatively high tolerance for risk. And I'm willing, and I was willing in my operational career in the CIA, I was willing to hang my butt out there a little bit because of the possibility of doing something really good instead of doing something half-assed but covering all my bases. I had a tendency to do that. So now, a lot of times that was successful, and I was recognized for that. But of course, the times I wasn't successful were a little bit more dramatic than the dweeby guy who wasn't taking as much of a risk. Because I was more of I was a judicious risk taker. But that's the way Trump is with his foreign policy, and it's absolutely the way I am. And it's part of it is education. I mean, when Soleimani died, it made my week. I mean, I've been saying that guy should be eliminated since Bush was president. It was obvious. But look at that, for example. I was at the time I was a big deal at COS and the CIA. But who's going to listen to me, right? I'm not even an Arab. I don't speak Arabic. I'm not even in that theater of operations. But it was clear. Okay, at the time we knew that American troops were being killed by IEDs, explosive devices that were brought in from Iran. Okay, this stuff is not rocket science. If you've met Iranians, you know the most basic things about survival in the Middle East. I said the only thing we need to do is literally you send teams across the border into Iran and you kill everyone in those training centers where they're training these guys, where they're making those weapons. You liquidate everything. And then you come back over the border and you know what? You didn't even talk about it. And when the Iranians accuse you, you deny it and say, look, I don't know what's going on in your own country, but maybe if fewer Americans were killed, there would be fewer incidents like this. Yeah. And the Iranians would have gotten that message, and you know it, and I know it, and everyone listening to this knows it. But how many 3- and 4-star generals and State Department experts told Bush, oh, we can't even think about doing something like that? Yeah. Right? And so all of these experts, it turns out they were expert on exactly nothing. They failed. Exactly. They failed. Because they had no imagination at all, and they just don't have a feel for the street, whether it's the Arab street or the Russian street or just human nature, the way people are.
They don't.
You know, it's funny. I say things like this. Sometimes I speak at prisons about foreign policy, which is actually kind of funny, and I enjoy it. I'm pretty well paid for it. And but what I'm saying is it's so funny that I can sit there and talk to a bunch of inmates, and guess what? They all understand everything I'm saying. And why is that? Because they're on the street. They were a member of a gang. They get it. You punch the guy in the nose immediately. Yeah. And guess what? He's not going to come at you again.
I keep saying that we've treated Iran like we treat let's say you're a strapping young man and you're maybe you're the quarterback of the football team and stuff, and but you're a good guy, right? And there's a bully who's picking on people, and every once in a while he picks on you a little bit, but you're big enough to handle it. Well, that bully keeps studying mixed martial arts, taking steroids. He's getting meaner. He's getting more vicious. Eventually, he's going to attempt to stomp your ass in the ground in front of people. Eventually, it's going to happen.
Right. And right. But somehow, if you fight him, well, then you're going down to his level. And that attitude, I always reject it. Well, if we do that, we're reducing ourselves to the level of the enemy. No, we're not. Because see, we're not the enemy. There is such a thing as justified biblical anger, and you smite your enemies, you destroy them.
Well, that's what I want to
Because
ask.
it's better for future generations.
And I agree with that, because as we've seen, the same people that we're dealing with now are the same people that Thomas Jefferson dealt with in the Barbary Wars.
Right, exactly.
But let me ask you this. You and I have been in media. My first episode of The Experts, I talked a lot about media and about Tucker Carlson. And I didn't hit on Fox News too much, but Tucker Carlson really does represent this mindset that people believe that we should be a strong nation, that we should ensure safety, but unless we are being attacked, and I even question his motives in that case, we should not do anything. Rand Paul's kind of like that as well. These libertarians, really they're libertarians more than anything, and they're like conservative liberals is what they are. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's almost as if they smoked dope and then came up with these solutions that we should not reach out and do exactly like you just said and smite our enemy and crush them so that they don't even try to do anything. But they don't, we don't use, now we're under these rules of engagement where, you can't, I'm not saying we should do this, so don't let anybody write in and say, why are you doing this? But there used to be a day and time where, if Putin was always accused of this, like if Chechens did an attack, that they went after their families. They went after the terrorist families and they killed them. And there was, there's always been this talk of using the different superstitions that our enemies have, like in Islam, and they won't do that. They won't do it because they say it's politically incorrect. So we've gotten to this point when we fight that, and people like Tucker Carlson and all these news people that have no experience in anything, they've never done anything. Majority of these people that call themselves paleo conservatives are too young to have done anything in their lives. They haven't been in the military or anything. And they go around spouting off how Israel is bad. They spout off about how Iran's issue is because we are lackeys for Israel, and nonsense like that. And I find it, and I'm wanting to see what your perception is on that, because are you seeing the same thing here? And how surprising is that for you? You and I, having done all these things, we get out, we go in the media, and they're really not interested in people that have experience. They'd rather put somebody up there who's shiny.
Right. It's true. I mean, like the Tucker Carlson thing, I was very disappointed. Like generally, I like him. I liked him as somebody who seems to, he's willing to maybe question some things. Like for instance, he questions our being in Iraq and stuff. And I think that there's some value in doing that. Like in other words, you got to just take each, like in a very Zen-like way, you got to take in each issue and deal with it on the basis of its specifications.
Right. You can't solve it.
What I'm saying is, but that's why it was so strange when I saw you on Twitter, because I didn't see what he was talking about, and I couldn't believe it when I read your Twitter. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, why would he say something like that? Like he's against taking out Soleimani? Like that's just stupid. And I guess maybe everyone makes a mistake now and then. Maybe he'll snap out of it, but. That's a mistake of enough.
He's doubled down on this. He's doubled down, and he's become very emotional. Every picture they have on Fox is of him brooding. Every time I've flipped by the channel, it's him screaming about something that he's confused the deep state with exactly what you were talking about a minute ago, which is these incompetent leaders that are really leftist. They're not. Right. They're not the deep. Well, the deep state are leftists, right? But these people and the reasons why there's two different factions in Washington D.C. I think people should realize. Besides all the politics, there are the people in these agencies that are leftist, and those people exist, and they may even call themselves conservatives, like James Comey, who say he voted Republican, but the fact is they're leftist, right? And then you have this other group of people that are careerists. They're very much like George Soros when he was a young guy and he was Jewish, but he got a job because they didn't know he was Jewish, and he was basically taking all the stuff off of all the Jewish people who are getting ready to be killed. I mean, that's the way careerism is. I'm going to do this job.
Preservation, pass the buck, avoid responsibility.
And believe that you know better, and believe that what you're doing is of a higher calling. That's the way these people believe. So those are the two groups that cause a lot of these problems within these agencies. Tucker believes that they're the same. and they're not the same. And he also
No,
believes
sometimes they may work together, but it's not like
Sure.
they're planning ahead. Right?
Well,
They may have confluent interests. Right?
They're
not the same. You're
I
right.
would say that quite often they do work together, but we shouldn't conflate a decision to take action against somebody like Iran, who's continuously been hitting us in different ways. I talked about the intel part in the first episode about how Iran is actually an intel agency that does amazing stuff, and people have died because of their intel operations. See, Tucker Carlson doesn't take any of this into account, and he equates the decision to take action to the people that are these leftists, and that is not the case.
Right.
Just because you want to take action against the enemy doesn't mean that the president's being guided by the same people that have tried to impeach him and overthrow him. That is not the case.
Right. Or maybe, and I think you see this with some people, like they'll say, like, for example, oh, well, somehow I'll give Iran a pass on making IEDs that killed 600 of our troops because, see, well, we shouldn't have been in Iraq in the first place.
Oh, that's disgusting
right?
to say that. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, but that's not logical. Okay, I can go on all day about maybe it was a mistake going into Iraq, but the bottom line is you cannot let another country eliminate 600 of your people, whether it's in Germany, Argentina, or Iraq. You have to take action. It's not rocket science, but these people seem to be, confused by some of this stuff. It's somebody was saying, so Trump's foreign policy is kind of like, sort of like Jacksonian, people say. Like, in other words, Andrew Jackson was not a guy to be trifled with. He blew the brains out of at least two people who insulted the guy's wife in duels. And I think he carried a bullet. He carried like a slug from and it must have been a big lead mini ball near his heart for his whole life. Because he took a slug in a duel over his wife. This guy was not somebody to screw around with.
Right.
But he was, he believed in a strong America. He doesn't want foreign adventures, but if somebody hits us, we're going to hit them hard. And, I think that's a very sound policy. We can go on and debate whether we should be in Iraq. Maybe we need to reduce our presence in different countries. And I'm willing to give a listen to any of that.
I think it's very simple, really. I think the reason why we got in Iraq and the reason why we got in Afghanistan, I think it's different than what most people think. I do believe it's politically motivated. I do believe that there were other interests involved there, and I don't think that we've never named. Not think. I know we've never named the enemy. They never said it's fundamental Islam that we're fighting. That this disease that runs through the blood stream of Islam. They've never said that. That's not a hit on Muslims, and I keep saying that over and over again. I actually lost a speaking gig because I put a gig or a meme up on my website that said, wherever in the world Islam is at, the potential for terrorism exists. That's because through their bloodstream runs this fundamental belief that is exactly the way it was when Muhammad, who was a military, a religious, and political leader, it's the same tactics, techniques, and procedures that he used. We've never named that enemy. And so I don't think, quite frankly, that us being in Iraq or Afghanistan is doing any good for the war on terror. It's not doing anything at all. And very, very little. I mean, yeah, we take out this leader or that leader. But overall, this is a war that we are not going to win unless we take a step back and we say, this is our enemy, this is what their goal is globally, and this is how we fight them from a strategic point of view. And we don't do that. I literally don't think that we have a strategic plan that encompasses all that. I don't think they have it.
No, I doubt that we do.
How is that possible, though? When you were in, whether you were in the Navy or whether you were in the CIA, or even when you were a civilian driving ships, I mean, you have an overall mission, pick up materials here, deliver them there, make sure that the trip from here to there is straight in the ocean, that you don't veer over, that you don't run anybody. I mean, it's very simple, right? It's got a strategic plan and then tactical plans within that so that you can achieve your strategic goals. We just have not, I haven't seen any of that for the past 18 years. We kill Osama bin Laden, we do this, we do that, warlord here, or take out somebody there, skirmishes over here, push these people back, and then leave, and then they come back. I mean, we're not
Right.
devastating this enemy called fundamental Islam. That's not even in the game plan. I don't see how that could be.
Right, and it's not even. And the ironic thing is that because we're afraid of offending mainstream Islam, but the bottom line is that, again, like a lot of like secret cows, you just can't go there. But if you explain to like leadership, like let's say Al-Sisi in Egypt, and people like that guy like has got a big target on his back because he's like on record as saying like Islam needs to be reformed. But what I'm saying, so it's another example of how all the experts say you can't do this because of a million reasons why you can't do it. But if you actually do it, it's not that hard. And you would probably find support amongst a lot of regimes that are even Muslim in the world because they are combating the same kinds of things.
And I think Trump's proven that.
It's not the game ender, right? It's not the game ender that everyone thinks it is. The same way they thought it was a game ender. Oh my God, the Mall of America and the Empire State Building are going to be attacked the minute we take Soleimani out. No, it didn't happen. It might still happen, but I think it's unlikely. And it's because these people predicted it would be the end of every, I mean, literally, right?
Yeah.
All the kids thought it was going to be World War III, right? They crashed the selective service website, bunch of dumbasses can't figure out that, we're going to have a World War III with Iran, and we're going to start drafting people in a week. Yeah, that'll work. But they were all scared of it.
And see, that's why Tucker Carlson feeds those fears by saying stuff like, should we be sending our children to Iran a week after Christmas? I mean, why would you even say something stupid?
That's just a stupid statement. I mean, come on, that's irresponsible.
But that is the problem. That's the problem. Is that this is who is informing the young people, and not just the young people. This is people turn Fox News or talk radio on, and they leave it on in the background. They catch these snippets of stuff, and what they don't realize is that majority of it is entertainment value. It's it's not there to inform you, and they're actually doing a disservice in a lot of ways to people.
That's true.
And I think people don't understand, especially these young people in college. I don't know what it is about college age people. They're just. I remember when I was in college, we do and say things, and we're easily swayed and easily indoctrinated. But they nowadays, because of the smartphone, they just believe they know everything, and they really don't know a whole lot of stuff. And they believe that. They believe, oh, well, I heard Tucker Carlson say, or I heard this person say, this influencer on the internet say, yada, 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 we shouldn't be in Iran. And they just think, that we should not go because the Iranian people want freedom. The Iranian people are not in charge of whether or not they have freedom or not, because they have a regime that rules regardless of how much money or sanctions they have. I mean, they're going to rule with an iron fist. I mean, maybe their missiles won't hit the target, which I think is what their guidance systems must be horrendous from what we've seen. Although they do hit passenger planes pretty good, but
right.
But overall, we've gotten ourselves in a system in this country where people are just they don't look for experts for information.
No, unfortunately, I mean, right. I guess maybe what we are seeing is the victory of style over substance, and I think you see it everywhere. I mean, like, and I guess I always draw parallels with looking at the Soviet Union, because there are so many parallels. Like, because in the Soviet Union, for example, we're approaching this point in the United States. In the Soviet Union, because everything was party doctrine, everything was politicized, everything. Well, can we not agree that most things in America now are highly politicized? Ask your high school age daughter who's trying to participate in sports, and she's got 3 guys beating her in the 100-yard dash. Politics is affecting her high school sports. It affects everything, and so politics affects everything, and so then it becomes like fodder for entertainment. So now all these people, like the news and things like that, are all entertainers rather than people with some background on that. And it is frustrating for those of us who have some background, some expertise in a particular topic. But yeah, what is the solution? I really don't know.
Well, let me ask you this. I know one solution that is definitely not a solution. Okay. I don't know if you have been keeping up with the Democrat debates and things, but it's unbelievable when I watch these things and I see this group of clowns up on the stage Tom Steyer, what a weirdo. Thank goodness Mike Bloomberg wasn't up there this time. That guy thinks he's one of these people that he came up with a great idea. He made himself billions of dollars from a really good idea, but doesn't mean that he knows everything about everything. But these people, a lot of them, they get rich, and they think that that they, with that money comes a higher being, a higher nature, a higher knowledge and understanding.
Or
That's not true.
More discernment, but maybe it was it's just a confluence of luck. Right, exactly. I mean, look at that Mark Cuban or Cuban, whatever.
Yeah,
the guy sounds to me like a moron. I've only heard him speak a couple of times in different shows. I'm like, the guy's, I don't care how much money he has, he's an idiot.
Yes.
And I probably couldn't stand to be in the room for more than 10 minutes with the guy, because he spouts off about things of which he knows nothing. I mean, I like to think that people like you and I don't spout off about things of which I know nothing. If I don't know, I don't know anything about professional sports, I would never, but I would also never pretend to know anything. Or I would admit to somebody, I don't know crap about professional football. I don't feel a need to insert my opinion on professional football when I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, but they feel comfortable. They literally believe that they know these things, and you see them up on this stage, and it's just shocking. It's got to be shocking to you to sit there and watch these people say, "Oh, we need to do this or we need to do that," and they have no plan on how they're going to achieve any of this stuff. They say, "Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is clean up the environment." Well, Tom Steyer's a billionaire. If he wanted to clean up the environment, he could put his billions to work researching ways to clean up the environment and do it that way. He's not going to get elected president, and it's like it. When I see
it's just a big ego trip.
It's an ego trip, but the rest of them are buffoons. It is sad the point that we have gotten to. They're not only buffoons and incompetent, they're also not statesmen-like. They always accuse Trump of not being a statesman. I look at President Trump as somebody that when he walks into a room, a big part, and you know this, of being a statesman is command presence. And when you walk into a room, when I was a SEAL and as a junior officer, they would send us and we would brief generals. I remember going down to Chile for foreign internal defense, which was the dumbest thing we ever did, but that's where we go down and advise in country. And we walk in a room and we are with the Chilean generals and admirals. And we have command presence when we walk in there. That trident just screams, respect when you walk into these rooms. And the president has a tremendous amount of command presence when he walks in the room. These guys may want to laugh about him, but they know they don't want to cross him. And I can't see Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg. Could you imagine that guy, besides the fact that he and all the other ones are just as effeminate, whether it be Trudeau in up in Canada or France and all these guys, all these guys would just kind of, and I'm not saying anything about being gay. If anybody gets offended by the fact that I said effeminate, I'm talking about people who don't walk into a room and take control of that room. Being effeminate is not always what the left wants to describe it and define it as. When I say effeminate, I'm talking about Pete Buttigieg or Tom Steyer or Bloomberg walking in a room and people saying, "I don't want to cross that man and we need to listen to what he has to say." They're not going to do that with those people.
Right. I mean, right. Exactly. I mean, if you had think about it. If there was some, some neighborhood project in your neighborhood or in my neighborhood here in Pennsylvania, and somebody like that guy showed up and kind of took charge, immediately I read him for the guy doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. He knows nothing. And I would immediately jump in. And maybe I wouldn't be the first one to instinctively take over, but I am sure to take over a group if I see it's run by an incompetent. Then I will put my foot down and say, "Okay, I'm taking charge," because obviously no one else knows what they're doing. I always know my own limitations,
right?
But like some of these people, like Elizabeth Warren, I mean, I wouldn't hire her to navigate a way out of a wet paper bag. Let alone run a country. It's inconceivable.
I think you just hit on something huge, right? And we'll go ahead and we're going to start wrapping this up a little bit because we've been going for a long time. But one thing that you just said there is that you know your own limitations. And I think that that is a big thing that you learn through life, whether you're in the military or the CIA or FBI or law enforcement, or you're a doctor or a nurse.
Or running a business.
Or running a business. You learn that you have limitations. And unfortunately, learning those lessons comes with failure. You don't necessarily learn your limitations with success. That's what I've loved about this president. You know, I'm telling you, before he even got to the presidency, he'd failed and succeeded and then failed and succeeded, showing that it doesn't matter if your father gives you money to start off with. I don't fault anybody for that. But then he goes out and he double, triples, quadruples that money, loses, fails a couple times, comes back and creates more business. And what he has been able to do in the 3 years that he has served as president, it's remarkable under the pressure that he has been under. None of these people on stage could deal with what he deals with. No, they would all fall.
There's no question about that. I mean, I just read, there was an article by Conrad Black. He's a Canadian guy. I like him. He writes well. And he's written a biography of like Roosevelt and a couple of other figures. But he said that he put Trump's first term in terms of accomplishment up there with, he listed Roosevelt. Of course, a lot of what Roosevelt did was not good, but he did do a lot. It was like he literally put him up with like Roosevelt, Lincoln, and like maybe another guy. So like, in other words, he puts Trump as literally one of the most successful first terms in U.S. history. And I really think it's true. Yeah. I really think it's true. We are witnessing history. And in fact, even somebody, I would say, and I can say this, I do know what I'm talking about, in a sense that I remember when Reagan became president, but I think already Trump, totally different style, totally different man, but he has he's definitely exceeded what Reagan accomplished in his first term. That's a definite, that's a fact. Mm-hmm. But he will now, of course, the history, who's going to write these history books, I don't know. But Trump will be remembered as one of the great presidents. I hope that if we survive long enough to have a history written by somebody somewhat unbiased, he will emerge as a great president. Mm-hmm. And hopefully our country will be around in 100 years. And people will say that.
I think that we're at a point now in this country that if Trump gets reelected in 2020, then this is going to prolong it for another 4 years. But I can guarantee if he doesn't get reelected, that what's happening in Virginia is going to boil over in the whole country, because as soon as if the Democrats are able to control the House and the presidency, they will eventually get the Senate. And even if they don't, they are going to change this country just like they're changing New York and California and Virginia so fast that they'll be killing babies. Nobody will be able to have a gun. And as soon as they go down that road, things are going to boil over in a tremendous way. If it doesn't happen now, and depending on who runs, I think you and I should run for president and vice president in
actually,
in
you know what I think. What I think will happen, or like I can see myself doing this, is if you really think about it. Well, I think one thing that all the listeners can agree on is that I don't care who you are, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, I think one thing we can say about ourselves now, let's say 20 years after 2020, is that everyone has lost considerable faith in our national leadership in general, and we're far more cynical about people telling us what to do. So, like, in other words, I voted for Mitt Romney. Now I can't stand the guy, right? Yeah. I voted for Bush, and I can't stand the guy. Like, we've learned that our idols have absolute bodies of clay, not feet of clay.
Those are the idols that you were given. It would be like we're gonna make another amazing Mount Rushmore, right? Well, but we're not going to be able to choose. We're going to put up the Republican Party will choose who they're going to put up there, a Democrat Party. But ultimately, you'll look up there and say, we didn't choose those people. We didn't choose those people, and they really didn't do that great of a job because it's not our choice. It's not our choice.
Right. Trump, or as they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, in the land of the blind, maybe Bush has one eye, he's better, but he doesn't have two eyes. He only has one. So,
but you didn't choose him. You didn't choose him.
I didn't choose him. The Republican Party chose him.
That's right. So when 2024 comes around, what I'm saying is how many people like us are going to be very skeptical of almost anyone who runs as a Republican saying, I am going to uphold the Trump doctrine, the Trump Reaganism, Trumpism. So what I wind up, I think, arriving at the conclusion of, you know what, this is where his son comes in. So what I'm saying is, even though no one really likes the idea of dynasties, right? Like sons of presidents and blah blah blah. But what I'm saying is, what he has done has been so so important and key that maybe the only person I can trust to live up to his legacy is his own son.
I don't see. I'm going to disagree. I'm going to push back on you here because I don't think his son. And we're talking about Donald Trump Jr., I guess. You're not talking about Eric. I mean, either one of his sons, even his daughter. I don't believe that they have the same – they may have the same morals and ethics, but they have not failed. They have not failed like he has. And I've seen this.
That's a good point. See, I'm open to this.
I've seen –
maybe you're right then.
We saw this in Colombia most recently. It wasn't a son, but I forget the name of the president of Colombia, and we were down there, and he pretty much crushed the FARC. That was their terrorist guerrilla group.
Right.
And he had a protege that that was with him through the whole thing. And so obviously everybody thought, oh, this guy is going to be incredible. He's going to come in after the president, and he's going to continue those things. He came in and he destroyed it. Colombia's it's not fallen back to the point that it was, but it's gotten bad again.
My God! And so he was his protege.
It was his protege.
Could not be relied upon.
That's correct, because you see, here's the thing about Trump and about look at it this way. Look at Apple. Look at all the big music rock bands that were successful. And so look at Apple. Steve Jobs died. Look at Microsoft, the way it climbed up, and then Bill Gates kind of left, and it kind of, is not the same as it was. You look at these rock bands, and when so-and-so left, it kind of, dwindled a little bit. Trump is he is a clay pot made of ego, made of success, made of failures, made of years and years of battling. This isn't the first time he's battled. People like to make him into a character because he lived and worked and succeeded in a city full of these narcissistic, rich people, many of them who didn't do anything to get their money. They inherited it, didn't earn it, and many people who earned it crookedly. But yet they think of themselves as a sophisticated elite. And when Trump would walk in, they would demean him, not take him seriously. But here this guy was succeeding and failing, succeeding, fail, succeed. And that's who he is. And his son is not that. His daughter is not that. And so that's why, I've met Junior. I think he's a great guy, but I don't think these people are qualified to do that job.
He's not made of the same stuff.
No.
Okay.
And I think that's the only people that you're going to have that will carry this on from where Trump has carried it on. And it may not be somebody who's extremely wealthy. You're going to have somebody who has succeeded and failed, who's operational, because I think he's opened the door for somebody to come in and really, really get stuff done and throw out the bathwater and just freaking go for it. I think,
but again, that's going to be a rare person indeed. I see some of the local politics that go on in Pennsylvania, and I can't believe what I see. So
because they haven't had a Trump.
A regular politician will not be able to take over for Trump because he will always want to do it half measure,
you're
so as not
right.
to piss people off. And then he will wind up accomplishing nothing.
You know who would have been a great president after President Trump, besides you and I, as president, vice president, is that I think Ross Perot would have been a great president after Trump.
I actually voted for him, which probably is the reason Bill Clinton became president. And I don't know enough about him to say that, but maybe you're right, because you need that kind of he just lives to serve. He's not in it for, maybe a little bit for ego, but what I'm saying is he's there to do a good job, and he doesn't really care how many people he pisses off.
Yeah. And I think
that's such a rare quality in in politics, it's almost non-existent because you just don't get anywhere. I mean, I remember some people may remember I ran for Congress, and I did the best I could, but it wasn't good enough.
But you were fully qualified. You were more qualified than the people that were. I know, and I looked at the other candidates. You're more qualified.
But the sad thing is, I didn't get anywhere, and I didn't get anywhere because I didn't have the money, and I didn't have the resources, and also.
You weren't the chosen candidate. You were not.
I wasn't the chosen candidate because there's another problem that people run up against in our lives. I don't care what field of endeavor you go into, is that if you're really good at something, like let's say you're an FBI agent who's really good, the mediocre FBI agents tend to resent you because you make them look bad.
Yes.
So I know people in Pennsylvania who run for political office who, like, to me, they had a very impressive resume in terms of they had accomplished a lot in their life. But I remember one guy who ran for an office, and he went his way up from enlisted to colonel, which is impressive. And then after he got out of the military, got a degree after. So this is like a 50-year-old man or more. He got an MBA at Lehigh University. So I'm like, this guy's blowing me away. And he was running for an office, and he was successful. But I remember asking him, he called me, we met for lunch, and he was asking me for advice. Even though I was like, dude, you don't need a lot of advice from me. But I said, by the way, how much support did you get from the local Republican Party? And he said, none at all. Because human nature being what it is, like, in a perfect world, they would say, this guy is such a good guy, a real American. He just wants to do the right thing. We want him on our side.
A qualified leader. They're not looking for that.
He is a threat. He is a threat against the cronyism, and the cronyism that exists in state politics.
Right.
My God, that guy might expose the corruption that my cousin is doing, and he has to. Well, we might not be able to squelch him, but we sure as heck aren't going to support him.
Right.
And so, like, that's why politics is such a sewer, and it's a sad thing. And people who are experts are turned off by that and say, I'm not going to do that anymore because I don't like associating with these people. And now you've just abdicated the swamp to the swamp dwellers.
That's right. And so I think I had a listener write me an email once and say that and I love the way this sounds. He said, President Trump is not the guy who's going to dock the ship. He doesn't have enough time in 8 years to do that, but he is the guy who's going to turn the ship back towards port. And I believe that. And I think
that's very good.
Yeah. And if we don't get it right though, Scott, if we, in 2024, if we choose the wrong person, they could sink the ship or they could just turn it right back around. And that's going to be, I think that is going to be 2024 is going to be the tell-all of where this country goes. And it reminds me of,
right.
When you look in the Old Testament and they talk about where the scriptures had kind of disappeared for a while and then they were brought back out and there was a resurgence of the Jewish faith and relationship with God. We're going to have to, 2024 is going to be from 2020 to 2024, there's going to have to be a resurgence of the Constitution and of our judicial, our
right. Now, luckily, Trump
Judeo-Christian values, our Judeo-Christian values.
You're right. But see, like, I'll tell you what, his something, see, like, this is one reason, okay, my own arrogance, but one reason I was very successful at CIA in terms of my job recruiting people was because one thing I'm very good at is I'm very good at putting my mind into the mind of the enemy or the adversary and understanding their culture, etc. Right. So think about this. So like Putin certainly is not a good guy at all. So, but like think about the conversation we're having right now, right? How would you feel if you were like, let's say, a nationalistic, patriotic Russian, and like, Putin right now is just starting to screw with the Constitution to stay in power longer? But listen to like the fears we're voicing about after Trump leaves. Now imagine if you were a Russian in Russia, how would you be reacting to the way, like to the potential that Putin would leave? You know what I mean? Like, in other words, if you're Russian, you would look upon that would be more disastrous than our 2024 scenario. Oh my God. Like, and this is one reason why in other countries, dictators hold on to power, because people are so afraid of the alternative, the unknown, that they will embrace somebody that they know is not good, but he's better than, like the unknown,
Yeah.
And that's how these dictators hold on to power. But like, because those people are human beings too, and we're human beings, and we have these concerns about Trump.
That's how Clinton won a second term.
Right.
That's
right.
what I believe. Bill Clinton. That's how Bill Clinton won a second term. You know, people were, you know, embarrassed by him in a lot of ways. I mean, I thought he did actually a halfway decent job of keeping the status quo, but I think
he did.
But the second time around, I think people voted for him because there was no alternative, and they didn't want, you know, things to crumble from the place that we were. That's what
But by the way, I read another very good article, and this was it. I like these. I like articles. They're unusual that take like the view from 20,000 feet kind of thing. Yeah. I just posted one on Twitter right now that people can check out on the Swamp. That's a 10,000, 20,000 foot view, and this is another one. And this article was very interesting because it said, okay, if you look at the past Republicans, let's look at Nixon, Reagan. We won't talk about Ford because he was only one term. Nixon, Reagan. And Bush, the second Bush, every one of them had a problem in their second term. The second term did not live up to the first term. Like Reagan had Iran-Contra. Regardless of what it was, it took the momentum out of Reaganism, sort of. Okay,
right.
And then Bushism took over, and then Nixon, same thing. Like with Watergate, derailed him. You know, he had a good first term, but Watergate derailed him. And then the third president, Bush 2, had the Iraq War and all that crap. So all of their second terms were derailed. So this guy was saying Trump is not going to be the same. Because think about it. Every single thing that can be done has already been done against him.
Right.
What are they going to do? Impeach him a second time? Actually, what the guy wrote, and he was concerned about it, he said, actually, what I'm worried about is that someone will try to eliminate him.
Well,
that's the only threat.
That's the other thing they talk about.
Eliminate him.
I mean,
so
let's look at the reality. The thing that they talk about, the only thing they talk about just as much besides impeachment is eliminating the president.
My God.
That's the truth. That's what the left does. You hear it all the time.
So but what I'm saying is there is reason to be hopeful because he's saying that like literally the guy's going to be unstoppable. Like you thought the first term was a busy term. He's going to go it's going to go into overdrive when he wins the second term. So I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I just like the historical perspective. By the way, did you see, talking about Virginia, I love this. Did you see that West Virginia introduced like something that basically they're saying, oh, by the way, like we will consider taking you into West Virginia if you want to secede from Virginia.
Interesting.
Now, I thought that was fantastic. I'm like, if I was a West Virginian, I would have done the same thing. Like, okay, fine. These guys, we seceded from Richmond. And if you're tired of what Richmond's trying to tell you to do, you can join us. And I thought that was hilarious.
So that's actually historical that West Virginia succeeded.
Well, yeah, remember West Virginia seceded from secessionist Virginia because they were like they were mountain folk and they were more pro-union. So like West Virginia was created in 1863. They seceded from Richmond when Richmond seceded from the Union. So we're not part of this. We're staying in the Union. That's how West Virginia was created. And so they're saying to the counties in Western Virginia that, okay, if you guys want to join, I got some kind of resolution, whatever. I don't know. It's not really a joke. It's like half serious. That like, okay, if you guys want to come into us, and I think that's fantastic. Like you can
I think it's great.
You can just pick up your like, okay, fine. I'm voting with my feet. I can't physically relocate, but screw you. I'm going to join the other state. I love sowing discord and chaos amongst your enemies, and boy, that'll really piss the idiots off in Richmond. So I'm all for it.
It's scary. It's actually really scary. What's happening down there, and the level that it's been able to get to, and how many of these leftists have been able to congregate in the Virginia government. It's right. Pretty incredible considering it's all military bases there.
And I just drove through when I went to Florida with my family. I drove through Western Virginia for like, I don't know, first time in probably 30 years. And it's very much like Pennsylvania. It's very much from where I live. I mean, like if, you wouldn't have a single person look at you weird for wearing the Trump 2020 hat. The same way if you walk around like my neighborhood, you would get no one looking weird at you. So like it's very much like Pennsylvania, very conservative in that rural area. And I sympathize with them. I can't. I mean, as bad as it is in Pennsylvania, we're always pissed off at city folk in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I can't imagine as a Virginian living in Western Virginia how they must first of all, they despise Northern Virginia, of course, because and how much they must despise Richmond right now. I mean, talk about not representing you.
Yeah. Oh, it's vicious, dude.
It is.
Listen, real quick before we go, I want you said something about Putin that that he's in the news again. What happened?
What happened was I was hoping to get a Fox gig. They didn't call me, whatever. But what happened was Medvedev, and so like Putin is the president, and Medvedev is the prime minister and is head of the quote government, like the government that's voted in, so to speak. And so Medvedev and his government, quote unquote, resigned today.
Mm-hmm.
Putin had a State of the Union address last night, and he's talking about modifying the Constitution. Now, this is kind of like a rerun because some people may remember, I forget what year it was, 2008 or something, that there was a law that you can only be president for like, I don't know, 1 or 2 terms. And Putin was president for 2 terms. So he wasn't allowed to be president again. So what he did was he then stepped down and he became prime minister and Medvedev became president. But see, when Putin moved his position, that job became the de facto leader. And they changed the Constitution so that they made the presidential terms like, I don't know, let's say 5 years instead of 4. Like Putin had 2 4-year terms, and then in 2008 was, I guess, done maybe. But they rewrote the Constitution that you can have like 2 5-year terms, and that it takes effect when the new Constitution was ratified. So that meant that Putin could come back to power for 2 more terms as president after the new Constitution. Okay? So he was just reelected, which means that Putin can be legally president of Russia until the year 2024. But the big question is, what about after that? And so what's happening now is he's already laying the groundwork for rewriting the Constitution again. And so that's why, like,
what a gig that guy has.
Right, exactly. Like you just keep on, like it's like the Senate voting each other pay raises in the middle of the night. It's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So Medvedev and stuff resigned because we got to rewrite the Constitution, and there's something he's like, but maybe he'll do something like, okay, I'll be prime minister again, but when I become prime minister, I'll be damn sure that the new Constitution makes the prime minister the most powerful guy in Russia, or whatever, like that kind of stuff, because. It's funny the way dictators are. Like dictators very rarely are like just absolutely naked aggressors who don't care about anything. Very rarely. They actually like to follow their own laws, quote unquote. And whether it's a Hitler or a Stalin, they don't just do this. They will create some BS tissue thin fictitious backstory to justify. Like when Hitler invaded Poland, right? He had German troops in Polish uniforms shoot up a German radio station. So that when he started World War II, it was because we are responding to a Polish attack on a German radio station. So I'm going to start World War II on that basis. And it's ridiculous, and everyone sees through it. But he still felt he had to do it. So it's the same kind of thing that Putin's going through now. Like, we all know what you're doing, Vladimir. Right. It's just that, why do you feel the need to do it? It's like, it's a sham anyway.
The word dictator, that sounds like a bad bag of potato chips, doesn't it?
Yeah.
a bag of potato chips I never want to reach into.
Yeah, I guess I remember there's a lot of different things I used to think as a kid, or I always knew my history as a kid, but there's different things I learned. You learn much better as an adult.
Yeah.
And one thing I remember as a kid, I would always think you're a dictator. It's a great gig, but after a while, just step down and retire. But it's like the mafia. You can't retire because the minute you step down, is when your enemies will sense weakness and kill you and your family.
Well, it's also
it's like, so you got to stay there. Whether you like it or not, you have to stay. And so like that was one thing I didn't get as a 15-year-old kid, you know?
But it's also, I think what it comes down to is that being in that much power, it's not just a job, it's a lifestyle. It is your life.
Right.
And they live lives that, you know, most human beings can't even conceive of living, of luxury and shuffled around and fake importance, but in their mind it's real importance, you know. So, you know, the reality is with those people, that's why they never leave that job, because why would you? You know, any person that's power hungry, narcissistic, and sometimes psychopathic, they get in themselves into a position where all hail them. They're not going to leave that. Why would they? Why would they?
The nature of
Are you cooking a hot pocket while we're talking?
Not a hot pocket. Some chili, because my wife went out to do some shopping. So she left me alone. So
well, I'm gonna let you eat your chili. By the way, that sounds really freaking good. And I can't thank you enough. I always say this whenever I interview on the radio, but for all that you've done for this country and for the heart-filled service that you've provided, and I mean, listen, Pennsylvania, I screwed up, and I think that potentially one day I think you should run for office again. Like I said,
well, one thing actually I'm literally in the middle of right now, like I'm doing my soul searching, is I may run again for Trump delegate to the convention. I wasn't going to, but then I was called, and some people made a case for why I should run again. It's cost a little bit of money. It's nothing like a congressional run. It's much easier.
Yeah.
But I may be looking at doing that again, only because why? Because it's kind of like they're hitting me where I live in terms of they're mentioning the corruption in Pennsylvania and stuff, and how this is a way of putting the thumb in the eye of the enemy. And when you put it that way, it's hard for me to say no.
Right, yeah.
You know, like if I have the potential to piss off some bad people, I have a tendency to go along with that. So that's my character flaw.
Hey, and by the way, if anybody wants to know the difference in our personalities, I'm not saying we're exact like this, but where our minds are, watch the series on Netflix called The Last Kingdom. And you're very much like King Alfred. King Alfred was an intel guy. He read and collected information, and that's how he made his decisions. And then Uhtred was a warrior, and he made tactical decisions. And he did what Dave Chappelle used to talk about, keeping it real. It never worked out. That's like me. So, so it's very interesting. If you watch that, I think you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I'm
going to check it out now. I'm going to have to check it out.
Once you start watching it, you will not be able to stop. It is
The Last Kingdom.
The Last Kingdom, I think.
Is it Britain? Is it Britain, or is it a fictitious kingdom?
No. It was Uhtred was a real character, but they use him in a fictitious way here. And King Alfred was he was the king that was trying to create a unified England. And so that's real. But you see the story through Uhtred's eyes. But I'm telling you, next to Game of Thrones, and I would even say this is probably better than Game of Thrones, but without the CGI and stuff. This is the best show I have ever watched, period, in my entire life.
All right, that's a hell. All right, I'm gonna have to get the wife. We'll have to watch this one. Then.
Yeah.
It sounds irresistible the way you put it. So.
Yeah, it's pretty good. All right, brother. Listen, thank you very much, and I appreciate all that you've done. Like I said, and for coming on here and spending 2 hours talking about all this stuff, and letting the people know a little bit more about you.
Right. I guess is this going to be put out as one show?
I think we might. We'll see. We'll figure it out. I'll cut it.
Okay. I'll be curious to see. Hopefully it will keep people's interest.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, well, I have magical editing hands, so we'll figure it out. But thank you very much, and I appreciate it, my friend.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You got it, buddy.
Talk to you later.
Out.
All right, bye.
So there you have it, folks. What an incredible interview. Scott Eulinger, just an amazing guy. And remember how at the beginning of this show, I was telling you to think for yourself. Listen to this guy, comparing to the other people that I talked about that exist in Washington, D.C. Compare this man to those people. And what do you see? You should see somebody who is fully qualified to be a leader in our government. I mean, there's no way that you can say that's not true. Unless you're crazy, I guess. But this is who needs to be pushed forward, pulled forward, Get them in Washington, D.C. These are the types of people that can actually come up with good solutions. Not 26-year-olds, not 30-year-olds that have never done anything. They're social media famous. That's not who we need to be pushing forward. This right here is what you should be shooting for. This type of person. So listen, I can't thank you enough for coming on and listen to this. I think it was I just gave the wrong, that's not our intro or our exit song. Let me go to our exit song here. That was interesting. Okay, here we go. There you go. Thank you for coming on the show again and listening. Remember, subscribe to the show. Tell your friends about it. If you got people who, I don't know, are lost and they don't understand the reality of how things are going and they don't know where to turn because news is fake, turn them onto this podcast. The reality is the people I'm going to have on here, the analysis that you're going to get is way better than what you're going to get from the mainstream media and many, or I would say most of the radio shows that are out there and podcasts for that nature, for that matter. I mean, heck, I'm looking at all the podcasts and news. The majority of them are people from the mainstream media. Good Lord. They've got a monopoly on everything. But this right here, this podcast is for you. You can follow this. You can subscribe to it. You can push it out and let this be where you get, or one of the places where you get your information. Because I promise, wherever you see my face or hear my voice, there's one thing you can be sure of, folks, that the truth has arrived. I'm Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. Peace. And we out of here.